Esports is growing rapidly these days, with new orgs popping up all over, huge investments coming in from non-endemic sources, and some companies asking allegedly for millions of dollars to buy into their franchise leagues. It's easy to feel like we're in a bubble, one that's about to pop. I'm not a business expert by any means, but I do know that once upon a time, esports was in a pretty similar position to the one it's in now. Major outside investment was driving up production costs and salaries and changing the entire industry. And then, everything collapsed. But esports rebuilt from that mess, and I think we can learn a lot from what happened a decade ago.
If CGS doesn't make it, this would be the end of esports.
So, esports looked pretty different in the early to mid 2000s. There were almost no leagues, no salaries, and streaming was still just a pipe dream. Instead, there were a handful of grassroots events run by companies like ESL, MLG, and DreamHack, and they pretty much amounted to LAN parties. Sure, there were prizes for the winners, but they didn't look anything like they do today.
They proved themselves all season long, and they did it again tonight, winning $20,000 by finishing first place. Congratulations, Team 3D.
There were a few big events though. For example, the CPL World Tour had a $1 million prize pool and finals were broadcast on MTV, but it quickly fell off.
3, 2, 1, give it up, Fatality is your winner! Oh, winner! Yeah, you can hear him, he's going crazy down there.
But the CPL got the attention of TV executives who were looking to replicate the success of the World Series of Poker. They wanted to turn gaming into a spectator sport, and News Corp decided to fund their own televised gaming tournaments.
This is the Championship Gaming Invitational.
After 2 successful pilots on DirecTV, the Championship Gaming Series was greenlit and became esports' first official televised league in 2007.
On opening night, you'll get a chance to see all 6 teams in action, including a rematch of last year's World Finals between the Chicago Chimera and the Carolina Core. It all starts June 2nd at 9 p.m. Eastern, weeknights through June 13th at thecgs.com.
CGS was a pretty big departure from everything esports looked like in the mid-2000s. Actually, it looked pretty much like what we see today, with a light show and a big stage and red-eye hosting.
First up, Stockholm Magnetic, managed by legendary GM Emil Heaton Christensen. They'll be looking to go one better in 2008 after finishing behind Berlin in the European final and the World final in 2007.
Red-Eye wasn't the only esports personality you know about that was involved with CGS. FNX, Mo, Sponge, Fiflaren, and Henry G all played CS in the league at one point or another, while the Stockholm Magnetic and the Los Angeles Complexity stuck around as Ninjas in Pajamas and Complexity respectively. CGS also paid people pretty well, which was rare in esports at the time. Allegedly, CGS paid out $5 million in salaries and bonuses across the first season, with millions more invested into production. But this is the story of the first esports bubble popping, which means that things weren't exactly perfect. For one, while there were a few endemic esports personalities and business people involved, the production as a whole didn't really get esports. I mean, just watch.
DirecTV has flipped the script. Gaming is the hottest sport on the planet. And these players are fast becoming 21st century sports heroes.
This video just in, recorded at a local tournament. Players are being rounded up whether they like it or not.
She was a few levels higher than me when we first met. But let's just say that she's helped me gain a few experience points.
There was also the game's selection. See, at the time, Halo was the hottest esport in NA, but MLG was running all of that game's major tournaments. Instead, CGS had Counter-Strike Source, Dead or Alive 4, FIFA 07, and Project Gotham Racing. In 2008, they upgraded to FIFA 08 and Forza 2, but any way you look at it, these were not the most popular esports in the world. And for some reason, they insisted on only showing Source from a third-person perspective, which is just awful.
5 men up for both teams. Again, some of the best games from the San Francisco Optics last year came on this map. They're certainly a capable Counter-Strike team, but the question is how much more capable could the Birmingham Salvo be?
But what's most similar to today, and probably what's most important to remember about the CGS, is that the way it interacted with the existing esports scene was disastrous. These days we say that esports has just left its Wild West phase, but that's only half true. See, the real Wild West of esports was the mid-2000s, which was full of unpaid prizes, unpaid salaries, and look, it was just a lot of people not being paid, okay? CGS wasn't as shady when it came to paying people, which made them appealing to a lot of people in the industry. Unfortunately, according to esports journalist Richard Lewis, who briefly worked for CGS back in the day, the league effectively choked competing tournaments out of existence. Teams and players in CGS couldn't attend any tournament they wanted because CGS executives demanded a certain level of exclusivity.
Now, there was a very famous case at the time. There's a chap called AZN, Kevin AZN Wang, and he played in CGS. He was a 1.6 player, and he went to a small 1.6 LAN for friends, and he got fined $5,000, which was a big chunk of his salary for attending this LAN, because A, he didn't ask express permission, and B, had he asked express permission, he wouldn't have got permission because CGS had gone with Counter-Strike Source, and therefore you were not allowed to play 1.6, talk about 1.6, promote 1.6 while you're working for the CGS.
Not to mention the fact that organizations who didn't want to sell their brands to CGS were quickly broken up, as their players were offered better salaries than what the team could afford.
And this is again what the CGS did. It broke existing teams apart, and it did take a special form of pleasure in doing it to the teams that didn't want to toe the line. Fnatic, for example, had the best Counter-Strike Source team in the world at the time, and they didn't want to sell the Fnatic brand to CGS, so their team got broke apart and weren't allowed to compete as a 5.
CGS gobbled up most of the top-level Source players in North America, which meant that those players weren't attending most tournaments. That meant those tournaments couldn't secure sponsorships, which meant lower prize money, which meant teams didn't want to go in the first place, which meant those tournaments eventually went away, leaving only CGS. Basically, CGS built themselves an enormous bubble, and they primed it to pop. But the league itself did see some successes. It got people in the mainstream talking about esports. Being on TV was a much bigger deal in 2007 than it is now, and allegedly, it had decent ratings.
Yeah, the magical number for the Birmingham Salvo was 22. The Optics, on the other hand, they needed 8 rounds on the CT side. And while Counter-Strike miracles have happened in the Championship Gaming Series, not tonight. The only miracle that we saw was Birmingham Salvo bringing home the World Championship.
CGS was meant to be an enormous sea change for esports, and then it all came crashing down. 2008 was kind of an important year. Iron Man kickstarted the MCU, Bitcoin was invented, and oh yeah, the global economy fell off a cliff and into a recession we are still feeling the effects of. The recession changed esports a lot, but what's important for our purposes right now is that basically, single-handedly, it killed CGS.
Before we really had the chance to work from the inside to fix some of the issues and how it was presented in some of the formats, the global recession hit, and they were already like $50 million deep into this thing. The economy was tanking, and News Corp was closing a lot of its speculative projects, and we got shut down.
The companies bankrolling CGS saw the global recession and decided to shut the show down. And to a certain extent, that makes logical sense. I mean, CGS was not making money hand over fist. It was a purely speculative venture that they hoped would make money in the future when esports was bigger. I mean, they literally said it was an idea whose time came too soon. But by killing it so suddenly, they did a lot of damage. The esports industry as a whole was hit hard, but individual people were hit harder.
So I went from owning a law firm and owning Complexity, selling both to pursue the esports dream, to being unemployed in a state that I wasn't even licensed to practice law in.
Jason Lake wasn't the only person whose life was uprooted by CGS. Every player, broadcast personality, and behind-the-scenes producer was left jobless, but perhaps more importantly, they were left without a lot of prospects. Remember how CGS pushed NACS tournaments out of the market? Well, without a circuit to return to, a lot of the Source players quit en masse because the money that was left in the scene wasn't even close to what CGS had paid them.
People wanted to quit. People didn't want to keep going for them. There was a few guys who wanted to step down.
Some people went back to 1.6, but there wasn't a lot of money left in the NA esports scene, which caused a lot of talented players to quit. The lack of money wasn't just because CGS left a giant cash vacuum when they disappeared. A big factor was that CGS was all of a sudden an enormous high-profile failure, one that News Corp invested millions of dollars into. It was enough to make anybody think twice about investing their money into esports.
It was really tough. I was once famously quoted when CGS was starting out that if I said if CGS doesn't make it, this would be the end of esports or something to that effect. And I wasn't right, but I wasn't totally wrong either.
It's not that CGS did a great job of presenting CGS to the masses. They didn't. But the fact of the matter was that their failure turned the clock back. Investment was gone, TV was a pipe dream, and salaries shrank. But I'm standing here, you're watching an esports YouTube channel, we have highly paid players, franchised leagues, esports on TV, not that it really matters these days, more than a decade later. What happened? Well, the few companies that survived the crash toughed it out and helped rebuild esports from the grassroots. DreamHack, ESL, MLG, they all kept doing what they were doing. Sure, the recession probably impacted their bottom lines, but they saw the future that esports could provide.
Then we have the CGS comes along in 2007 and we're like, yay, awesome, $50 million we can play with, we can make esports mainstream, we can go on TV, awesome. And then the recession hits in 2008 and that kills that off, and it also killed off CPL completely by then. It also killed off WSVG, which was the replacement. WCG was continuing to decline in terms of numbers. ESWC wasn't going the same way. So then we have another down, and then we have to wait until 2011 before we start to see real shoots of improvement, most of it coming out of Korea, most of it coming from StarCraft, most of it coming from Twitch.
Hilariously, the same year that CGS launched, 2007, was the year that Justin TV started broadcasting. Justin TV found a ton of popularity with live gaming streams, which they spun off into Twitch, which eventually became one of the most important catalysts for the esports renaissance we're in today.
Turns it around, Ravage as well, stolen by Deadly. Are you kidding me? They turn it around. 4 heroes dead.
5 heroes dead. Chuan trying to survive.
And now for the first time ever at home, Season 8, Astralis are the champions of ESL Pro League, and for the first time in history, the best of all fucking time, Intel Grand Slam, it's Astralis.
10 years ago, esports had a TV show, big salaries, and mainstream media attention. Today, we have all that and more. We might be staring down another bubble again, but this time, esports knows what it takes to survive. The bubble popping doesn't mean that esports is going to suddenly go away. It means that things will have to scale back. And the people who survived the crash know how to do that. They know how to scale back and keep esports chugging along. They know that no matter how much investor money is poured into the scene, no matter how much of it suddenly disappears one day, people will always want to play video games together. They know what to do if the bubble pops, to embrace the grassroots communities that make esports so special.
Same way you watch a football match, you can hear the crowd, everyone's cheering the team on, you make friends, these are people you talk to, you play with online. It's all about community, it's being part of something that you're incredibly passionate about.
Thanks for watching. If you want more content like this, hit the sub button and ring that notification bell. For unique bite-sized videos you won't find anywhere else, hit up our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook pages.